Hello and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Sarah Walker-Smith has joined me in the studio today. Sarah, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Good to see you. I'm looking forward to hearing your story. The audience always knows that we start by just getting to know you a little bit first. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, in terms of jobs, I'm the chief executive of a group called AMPA, which is a large professional services firm, about 20 offices across the UK, about 1,500 people. I'm the chair of the Eden Project in Morecambe, but I'm not sure that's who I am. I guess who I am is somebody who's trying to change the world a little bit like everybody else is, especially in the current climate that we're at, around some of the things that are really important to me. I'm a mum as well and a wife, and I write musicals in my spare time and have acted in quite a lot of them.
Excellent. What are you working on at the moment?
Musical-wise, suffragette musicals, actually. I'm writing, I wish I'd never started this, but 7 different suffragette musicals, and I'm on number 4. They're all interconnected.
Oh, wow. Can't wait to see more about that. And even though you're a very busy person, have a very full life in that sense, if you really need to switch off and just have that kind of quiet time, how do you manage to do that?
Well, that's the writing musicals bit. I take myself off into somebody else's world. But interestingly, I think the reason I'm so driven to write musicals about the suffrage is because I think their stories need to be heard. And I think people like me stand on the shoulders of what they did before. So I love the idea of amplifying it. But that is how I switch off. And I sing the songs in the musicals and I record them. So for me, singing is the absolute switch off. I'll just spend ages trying to get a song right. And a bit like other people might go swimming or go running, it has the same effect on me.
So here's a question then. In terms of, this just come to me now, in terms of the places that you've sang in the past, what's the one that stays with you in terms of just the atmosphere, or the thing that you felt, the experience that you had at that point that is just, I don't know, was so different to any other?
I guess there's 2 really. I was lucky enough to sing in Windsor Castle last year,
Wow.
almost by accident. I'm a leadership fellow at Windsor Castle, and I was there doing a leadership event. Somebody knew that a colleague played the piano and I sang, and they got us up to sing impromptu. But just the privilege of being in a room where Shakespeare and Elizabeth I had been and singing was incredible. Actually, a moment that really came back to me, I was playing Mabel in Mac and Mabel a few years ago, and there was just this moment when I felt completely combined with the orchestra. I know it's an odd thing to say, but everything just came together. And that moment of synchronicity when it all comes together, and it sends goosebumps up me now. Just remembering what it feels like when something goes perfectly. It doesn't always go perfectly, but when it does, the feeling's incredible.
And that's why I asked you, because other people that have said the same thing. There's only maybe once or twice it's happened, but they just feel that inflow. They just feel connected with everything.
Connected is the right word. Totally integrated and connected.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely. Thank you for sharing that. Now, the people listening to this and watching this today are very interested in the connections between our earlier experiences, life, and then what that means in terms of leadership. So tell us a little bit about your background, how that impacted your leadership style.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I was presenting at a leadership conference, and I was asked to talk about my personal journey. And I always found that very difficult. Until that point, a few years ago, I really hadn't talked about it or even thought about it. And a few people came up to me afterwards and said, what a great example of social mobility you are. And I swear to you, I was in my 40s and it had never occurred to me that I was a social mobility example. But when I describe it now, it's obvious. But for me, it was normal. So there's no sense of being a victim here or anything like this. But I'm from Lincoln. My mum was a single parent barmaid. I've never met my dad. He left when my mum was pregnant. I went to school on a council estate in Lincoln. We didn't have a car. We didn't go on foreign holidays. I remember the bailiffs coming to take the TV, which I hated because I loved watching historical programs and old musicals. When I look back now, thinking about the life I lead now, there were times my mum essentially threw me out of home on my 18th birthday because she was struggling herself. I look back on that now and I feel very sorry for her, what she'd been coping with. But I ended up living in a mouldy bedsit with no heating and no money, trying to do my A-levels. So I never want to forget what that feels like, because there are lots of people in that situation now. And I've been one of the lucky ones that has managed to somehow escape all of that.
So what did that mean then? And it's a very interesting story. I know you've told me before, in the sense of how that then shaped what your life was going to be like for the next 10 years or so. But growing up in that kind of environment and that point at 18, how did that affect you maybe in your sort of early mid-20s in terms of the way that you were leading your life at that point?
Well, I'd say there are two things I'd just add on to the childhood to take you through into the 20s. The first one was that because I didn't really have much else to do, I didn't have many toys or TV or computers or anything like that. I used to literally sit in the cupboard, like Harry Potter, and write stories. I think I look back now, I use storytelling as a means to kind of take me into a different place, to distract myself and to keep my imagination going. The other thing I did was I used to organize all the local kids into, we had a thing called the Garage Gang. I set up a club. I got them all doing plays. These are really underprivileged kids when I look back on it now. And I gave us stuff to do. And I kind of got them together. At school, I used to do this as well. So when I fast forward that through into my 20s and 30s, I naturally wanted to lead, and I naturally wanted to merge creativity with other skills. So I qualified as a chartered accountant. Won't bore you with that story, but it was a complete accident. And I did an MBA. And I remember probably the breakthrough point in my career when I was at Boots the Chemist in my 20s was when suddenly, I didn't realize what I'd done at the time, but I was asked to run a supplier conference. Now, Boots has massive suppliers like Procter & Gamble, L'Oreal, lots of other huge ones. And I remember organizing this conference and going, we need a presentation on the Boots strategy, and I can't articulate it. So I wrote one. And I remember somebody coming up to me afterwards and going, you've just written the Boots strategy. And I went, yes, but we didn't have anything to say to the suppliers. So I've always had this, I guess what shaped me is just fixing things, just going in and sorting it out and using that creativity. I suppose I have an abstract brain and a big picture brain. And because I couldn't articulate this thing, I just went and did it. So I think that's probably how some of that shaped me, but that's on a positive side. On a negative side, I think I've always felt outside the group. I think I felt like I don't belong. I still feel like I don't belong. I felt that right the way through, and the imposter goes berserk. But also, what I would say is having some difficulty in your childhood, and let's face it, my story is not particularly bad. There are some really, really horrendous stories about childhood, but it gives you a level of resilience that I think when I look back now, I'm grateful, really, really super grateful for that resilience, rather than saying, oh, woe is me, that was terrible. I actually think it was an advantage. And I think probably without realizing it, I've used it to help me through. But I don't have a sense of entitlement at all. And that can be a real obstacle sometimes. I think that lack of entitlement leads to the imposter syndrome sometimes, and thinking that everybody hates me, which I always do.
Sure. We may come back to that. It's a really interesting point you make. And again, you're right. There's lots of people that come on this show where they've had difficulties in their lives. And you're right, that survival instinct comes in. And therefore, we have these, what we want to call them, shields or barriers or whatever it is that come up, which enable us to be very resourceful and resilient and therefore lead. But sometimes that leads to problems where we're trying to connect to other people who we need to lead. So where did you find the first elements of difficulty in terms of the way that you built the survival mechanism in terms of then leading others?
Yeah. So I remember going on a leadership course that Boots put me through probably in my late 20s at Ashridge. And it was a week intensive course, lots of people who I didn't know. And because I always had this sense of not belonging and not fitting in, I felt really intimidated going into that environment. I don't have a degree. I didn't go to university. This was a really scary environment. And I think what happened was I kicked in with my normal just taking over, just getting on with it as I did. And I remember hearing a conversation in the bar on one of the evenings with somebody saying, oh, she's so bossy, I wish she'd just back off. And that absolutely floored me. But again, it just played into those demons in my mind that everybody hates me, and that often girls, and I got called bossy as a child as well, quite a lot. If they have natural leadership instincts, they're regarded as being bossy. So I suppose that just brought all of that back to me. And I remember having this moment thinking, I don't want this to be a pattern that keeps repeating. I need to become a lot more self-aware. And what really kicked in was understanding that I needed to be able to vary my style. And that probably is going to take us on to some of the things I did to change going forwards. But also another thing that I've been is very defensive, because I think I've always had to be quite independent and take care of myself and all the rest of it. So I've often reacted really defensively to people, or it's come across as being defensive, even if it wasn't supposed to be. The bit of my story I haven't gone into, and I won't bore you with, but there was an evil stepdad in the middle of all of this, as every good story obviously has. But my stepdad used to punish me quite publicly. Like, I won't go into the detail, but in a very humiliating way. And when you're a little girl of about 9 or 10, that can really have quite a big impact on you. So I think I've probably become more defensive because of feeling that attack at a very seminal point in my life. And that lack of entitlement meant I would very often not push myself forwards for pay or promotions because I would think I didn't deserve it. So, you get a combination of somebody who's naturally quite driven and is happiest in a leadership situation, with then somebody who beats themselves up for it all the time because they think they don't deserve it. It's a weird dichotomy. I've got used to it now, but it's pretty schizophrenic in my mind.
Sure. Well, take us into that world then, as you say, naturally leading on to how did you work through that? What changes did you need to make in your life to make this effective in a sense?
So I'm sure, Andrew, you will have come across this, but situational leadership, contextual leadership styles. I really loved some work that I came across by, I think it was Daniel Goleman was the first person that I came across with this, talking about the 6 leadership styles. And I have a lot of natural enthusiasm and passion. And if I just fast forward on my career a little bit more, and I was working in a very, very male dominated environment, I'm quite down to earth. I'm just fairly straightforward but very passionate. And I'd often have people around me saying, it's probably the little girl actor, the storyteller, you don't have the calmness of a leader. And I'm thinking, I'm incredibly calm under pressure. I mean, honestly, in a difficult situation, the calmness just takes over me, but it manifests itself in this very enthusiastic, outgoing, gregarious way. And I thought, how interesting that people are perceiving my passion and my very relaxed, informal style as not being calm or able to deal with things. So more and more I was starting to reflect on how different people were reacting to me differently. So I started doing things like Myers-Briggs, obviously, and other things to spend more time trying to understand them and understand how we're all wired differently. And having done that and understood that, and not just Myers-Briggs, there's lots of other things I've looked at. Other models are available. I then thought, okay, so how can I adapt my style while still being completely authentic to me, recognizing that especially in a man's world, and at this point I was still the youngest person in the room, I was going to have to find different ways of doing this to just, bulldozing in with my normal enthusiastic, we can fix this, can do kind of style. It wasn't going to work in all of those environments. So armed with an better understanding of others, using models and things, and armed with a better understanding of the 6 types of situational leadership that I'd read by Dan Goleman, I started to adapt and I started to think about what I was doing rather than just letting instinct take over. And so that was probably the biggest breakthrough. I think the other one was accepting, having been so self-dependent as a child, being independent is something I find very difficult. But of course, what you're trying to get to is interdependence if you look at the Stephen Covey stuff. So I went on a journey to see the value of collaborating, which made a massive difference, which you can do while still being independent at the same time. And the final thing I did was to respect the office of the title of the job that I was holding. So this is battling my sense of entitlement. I find it really hard to say people should respect me because I'm the boss or I'm in charge, but they should respect the office of the chief exec. So there's an element of, gives me a bit of that back. I mean, obviously you have to earn respect. Of course you do as a leader. But if you respect the office, it just helps me respect the office as well. And I can use that in a way that battles my own imposter syndrome and sense of entitlement.
So just to expand upon that, it's really interesting. There are 2 things that come to mind there for me, having worked with other chief executives about that journey we're on. One, you needed to create space and time to do what you're talking about there, because you were saying you have to think about this in different situations. You can only do that if you do create the space and time. And secondly, in terms of relationships, I was similar to you. I was very independent and struggled with interdependence. It calls for this element of trusting, really.
Yes.
Which also is quite challenging. So just talk to us about those 2 elements.
Yeah. Trust, it's a huge topic. So creating space and time, this is where, especially by this point, I'm at a point in my career where I've got children as well. And I'm still doing theatre, and I'm the chief operating officer of a large organisation. And so I started to reflect more journaling. I think, I'm not somebody who writes every day a diary, but occasionally I will just, when a thought comes into my mind, or I think I've learned something, or I've had one of those moments that something clicks, back to that music, everything clicks, I would reflect and I'd write it down. It sounds incredibly simple, but that's what I did. But then come back to the space and time thing. I'd do it when I was waiting for my son to finish his club and I'm sitting outside in the car waiting, I'll do it when I'm on a train. I'll do it when I'll keep a book next to the bed. I'll wake up in the morning having thought about something. I write it down. It's not perfect. And you've got to so let go of your perfection complex on this stuff and say, do you know what? I'm just going on a bit of a journey. And even now I have several notebooks where I'm writing down what I learn. And occasionally I kind of reset and write down how I see the world now, or what my biggest learnings, my biggest observations are. And I find time to do it. And I find time to do it because if you prioritize something, you will find time to do it. And I can see the value in it. So I take it right to the top of the priorities list. But multitasking is the perfect way of doing it. Do it whilst you're doing something else. You might be in the bath, but dictate a quick voice note if something's come to you that, suddenly you want to remember or think about. In terms of your second question, relationships, wasn't it?
Yeah, trust in the relationships.
And trust. Gosh. How do I do this one without going down an absolute wormhole? When I did my MBA, my dissertation actually was on trust. And I was working alongside 4 Boots, but with Procter & Gamble and L'Oreal to develop trust in the relationship. So I'd had a chance to really delve into the world of trust and understand some of it. And common goals tends to be at the absolute bottom. So I would normally start with anything, trying to agree objectives with people. That sounds more formal than it is, but working out what they need from something or what they want from something, and the Venn diagram of what I might need or want. And if you work on that bit in the middle and you can do that successfully, then often it can be expanded beyond that. But trust is also about consistency. It's about thinking that somebody has your interests at heart as well. It's about your words and actions meeting, which is probably the hardest bit to get of trust. And my problem is I tend to be overly trusting. What I have to work at more is challenging people, because I do tend to be, my overplayed strengths, if you like, are overdone tenacity and overdone tolerance. So I am incredibly tolerant of other people because I've such a low sense of entitlement. I don't expect anything from anybody. I really don't. It's odd. So that means it's quite hard for me as a leader to hold people to account, because very often I'll put myself in their shoes and go, yeah, but they've had a hard day, or it's really tough what they're trying to do at the moment. So it's almost the opposite way. So what I found harder is developing trust while still also holding people to account. I think that's the bit that I found hardest, whereas naturally I do trust people, and hopefully I win their trust by creating those common goals, hopefully being consistent and understanding them and what they want to get out of something.
I know we both have in common John Blakey's, for those listening to this, The Trusted Executive is a very good book to go and read to learn about the different aspects of trust as well.
Absolutely it is, yeah.
Lovely. So what I'm really interested in now, Sarah, and it maybe you want to put a couple of steps in before this, but you've obviously been on this journey where you became a chief executive, of a group that was acquiring other businesses as well over time. So just talk to us about maybe that transition, and again, what challenges you're facing, bearing in mind the kind of leader you're describing that you've become in that sense, just so the audience get a sense of that.
Well, do you know what? This is where the circle comes back round. So 6 years ago, I was finally got down to the last 3 for this job. And I remember going into this process. I hadn't had a job interview for 15 years. I'd been at my previous organisation, got my head down. If a headhunter called, I just ignored them. I was very focused on doing what I was doing. And the headhunter happened to call me at precisely the right moment. And I thought, do you know what? I might learn something from this. I've got nothing to lose. I'm not going to get the job, but why don't I find out a bit more about myself by going into this process? Because it was being run by a large international headhunting organisation. And they started with an agreed list of 50 candidates. And after 6 months, it had gone down to 3 candidates. And the night before I was due to do the final presentation, I got my outfit all ready, very chief exec outfit, a black suit. I was going to wear my hair up. I had my very chief executive presentation ready with lots of stats in it and, lots of intelligent things to quote from all sorts of strategic stuff that I'd learned. And I woke up at 3 a.m. and thought, that's not that's not the little girl from the council estate in Lincoln. She needs to show up to this interview, because if she gets the job, she can be that person. If I pretend to be somebody else to get that job, I'm going to have to continue faking it. I'm going to have to continue trying to pretend that I fit it. And I want to be somewhere where I fit in because of who I am. So I ripped up my presentation and I went in with a slide of a 5-year-old, 6-year-old ballerina. And I talked about an example of what happened when I was so desperate as this little girl in a council estate that wanted to do ballet that I did something really embarrassing and completely humiliating. But it just showed who I was. And I talked about me as a 5-year-old. So it's interesting that during the course of this, you've referenced back to childhood, but it was that moment that I really accepted who I was and said, accept me for who I am, because I think I can do some good here if I can show up and be me. And if you want me to be somebody else, I'm not the right person for you. And that's what got me the job. And, you know, I was the first woman and also non-lawyer to do the job that I'm doing in the country. And I did that. I still pinch myself every day and feel like I'm an imposter and I shouldn't be doing it. But it happened because I owned who I was and I used my childhood rather than tried to fight it.
Love that. And then as you then transitioned into that role and being you, and bear in mind, you've told us, you know, what you can be like as well with the good and the downside to that.
Yeah.
What did you then find were the most challenging aspects, particularly leading that new leadership team?
Yeah. So I'd been in the job. It's fair to say that my organisation was a bit lost about its direction of travel, but I liked that. You know, remember that little girl who was going to get the gang together and take them off into create something. So that suited me. What was tricky was before I'd really had chance to build relationships and work out who everybody was and bring, at that point we had about 800 people and you know, really kind of bring everybody together. We were thrown into the pandemic. So I now found myself doing this from my garden shed. And that felt very difficult because I like to connect with people. That's how I learn about them. That's how I get energy. It's through connecting with others. I'm doing this in my garden shed. Even worse, my family were in North Yorkshire. So for the first 6 months of the pandemic, I was by myself. So guess what? It was me, the little independent girl, feeling pretty vulnerable, actually, if I'm honest, through that time. And it was a really difficult time for me personally, but I can't complain because thank God me and my family came out the other side of it. There were people who weren't that lucky. But trying to deal with a business in crisis, and we were in crisis at that point, we lost nearly 50% of business virtually straight away. We weren't ready for remote and mobile working. And I'm now doing all of this by myself, sitting in my garden shed. But in some respects, the demons all came flying back in again. And one of the hardest things about those early years was fighting those demons and sticking to my guns about, no, I've got this. The imposter's not going to take over. But actually, you know, when I said to you earlier, I'm calm in a crisis, in some respects, that played to my strengths. And I was fortunate in having a great team around me who were so up for it. And we absolutely used this opportunity to transform our business. So in that respect, we created a crisis. What's hard on an ongoing basis is it's tough driving change. We're in a tough environment. It's really difficult being a purposeful B Corporation business that we are, a very large B Corp, one of the largest B Corps in the world, actually, and the largest in our sector. It's very difficult doing that. And also creating a commercial environment where the business is really strong and resilient and robust, and constantly having to manage that, because some of the things that sometimes you might want to do, you can't do. Some of the things you want to fix overnight, you can't fix. It's really difficult. And I also find it hard slowing myself down because my natural instinct is to go at 100 miles an hour, that steamroller I talked about in my 20s. I've learned to be the responsible bus driver is the way I call it. So sometimes we go fast and sometimes we recognize the bus isn't ready. We have to slow it down, get more fuel in the tank, do the repairs on the bus that we need to do and go again. And so learning how to pace myself has been really, really tough.
Yeah. No, thank you for being honest about that. I wanted to ask your view now on something that's very relevant to your industry. And I'm hearing this a lot now. I am 56 years old and many of the people that I work with are in their 50s to 60s. They're chief executives of organizations. And what I'm finding is, I'm not saying this is for you, just other people I've met, there's definitely some resentment building up in that generation now who are leading organizations with frustration that the newest generation the 5th generation coming into organizations don't want to do it the way they did it and therefore put all those hard yards and hard hours that we did. I'm just wondering what your view of that is and whether you're feeling that in the industry, because it's a real problem we're seeing.
Okay, so a number of things. My favourite picture at the moment, and I'm driving people nuts with this since 2025 started, is I have a picture of Albert Einstein that I keep sticking on slides anywhere. I'm in a meeting, I'll play the Einstein card. Einstein had a mantra, didn't he? That the definition of madness is to keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. Well, guess what? The world is completely different. There's no point, any of us, I'm the same age as you, there is no point harping back to what life was like then. It's not the same. If you look at young people now and the challenges ahead of them and the world they've grown up in and the constant media and everything else that they are absolutely subjected to the whole time, this is a generation who won't be able to afford to buy a house the way we did and make massive gains out of it because property prices were rising so high. This is a generation whose, to house salary ratio is entirely different to anything we knew. This is a generation who's watching the geopolitics around the world and quite frankly wanting to just go out and enjoy themselves with their mates because life could be very short. I mean, it's some really massive things going on at the moment. So I don't have an ounce of that resentment because it would be pointless because the world is different and we cannot expect people to do and be and say what we do. So what we have to do is reinvent things to make them work with what we've got now. And there will be different models. If you take the sector I'm in, and this noise has been around for a little bit, but an awful lot of people don't want the traditional equity partnership and all the responsibility that comes with that. Great. So let's reinvent the model then to make it work in a different way. So this gives us an opportunity to do things differently. And guess what? Probably do them better as well. So we have what we call an empowered working policy, for example, which says we have got 5 working generations. How can I mandate a single thing for 1,400 people that works for their lives? And I want to get the best out of our people, but I want them to also be able to live their life at the same time. So we have empowered working, which means it's focused on outputs. As long as you are connected as a team, you're delivering for your clients, you're hitting your objectives, and, you're essentially, connected to our business. What is the best way for you to work? How do we get the best out of you? And therefore, how does that work for you? And so our teams and our people are empowered. There is no 2 people that has the same working pattern in our business, but they have standardization of what they've got to deliver, but we empower them to work out how they deliver it, or some standardization of what they've got to deliver. So, we have to reflect that what somebody working in their 60s wants and what somebody working in their 20s wants is different. So we've got to give choice and empower people. And if you've come across Dan Pink's stuff, which I'm sure you have, good old the book called Crave. Yeah. He talks about mastery and purpose and autonomy. And, I think that matters an awful lot for the younger generation. However, if I may now just bring good old Maslow into this as well, all of those things are wonderful if the bottom of Maslow's pyramid is being dealt with. And for those of us who are now more comfortable at our stage in life, given what we've been able to deliver so far, we mustn't forget that for a lot of people working for us, they're still at the bottom of Maslow's pyramid. They're worried about paying the heating bills. And this takes me back to my bedsit and having mouldy walls and being freezing and not having a fridge and having to keep my milk on the windowsill to try and stop it from going off. A lot of people are living like that at the moment. And we've all of us, who are we to have at the moment a sense of frustration with what people are going through out there at the moment? And I think we all have to be empathetic to each other far, far more than we are at the moment.
Thank you. 2 more questions for you, Sarah. So we've got a few minutes left. The first is, we all have dreams, and I'm just thinking about the stage of life that you're at now, and you're obviously doing so much, but there's so much more to give in your life. So what's there left for you to do? What are you going to be in service of? What's the sort of dream for you?
Well, making sure that more little girls from council estates in Lincoln can do whatever they want to do. I never thought I'd be doing this. It never occurred to me. I go to the House of Parliament probably 2 or 3 times over the course of a 2-month period. I was there a couple of days ago. I walk through the door every time. I think, what am I doing in this place? I want to help other people get there, or wherever it is, the place that they revere, the place that they want to be. So I will show up in places, whether it's leading businesses or anything else I can do that helps show others what they can do and support them in doing it. That's probably the big thing. I mean, I could give you lots of specifics, but that's the theme. And anything at the moment, quite frankly, without getting too political about it, but when we look at what's going on in the world at the moment, I do feel very strongly that we need to raise our voice. And of course, I have a voice. I'm a singer. I'm not saying I'm going to start singing songs about politics. That would be interesting. But I have learned to use my voice, and I've learned what my voice stands for over the last few years. So I will be anywhere where I can use my voice to affect positive change for a fairer society for more people.
And if anyone wants to hear your voice, are there any public recordings anywhere they can go and listen?
What, singing? No, not really. Well, there are some on YouTube and various other things, but no, that's very much for me. I'm talking about my voice with other leaders, back to being interdependent again.
Sure.
So, for example, things like Anthropy that I know we're both involved in. I'm involved with an organisation called Vocal, which is all about helping future emerging leaders and existing business leaders raise their voice to make sure we get better solutions and that we're collaborating with government to deliver things. So come and get involved in some of those wonderful organisations like the IOD or Vocal or Anthropy or, anything that floats your boat if you also want to be part of a movement like that.
And final question. Let's believe that you are able to teleport yourself back to when you were a 9-year-old and your 9-year-old self knew that you had come from the future and you had this warm aura about you and you were obviously looking as though you were feeling fulfilled in life. What things would you say to that 9-year-old girl who was being humiliated in the street by her stepfather at that point? What would you say to her?
He doesn't define you. You define you. Don't let anybody stop you.
Thank you for answering that question. Sarah, I've so enjoyed having you on the show. Thank you for being vulnerable with us and for sharing your story. And yeah, I just love being with you today. And thanks for spending the time.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favourite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.